We'll move straight on to domestic matters. Rishi Sunak today is sort of battening down the hatches and telling us, Brits, cash-strapped Brits, to hold our nerve. Because, you know, he's got to keep, or interest rates will have to keep going up in order to control inflation. He's got to get inflation down. Now, that may well be the case. I get that. 2 points. The constant raising of interest rates doesn't seem to be bringing inflation down like it's supposed to. So that's one thing to consider. But the fear is here that this incredibly rich, wealthy Prime Minister of ours thinks he can just say to people, hold your nerve, it'll be all right. The people he's talking to cannot afford their mortgage repayments. They can't afford to pay their bills. It's not hold your nerve. It's they're going broke. And he doesn't seem to understand how desperate people are.
Yes, it's not hold your nerves, hold your life. It's people's livelihoods. You know, it's a bit rich coming from a multi-millionaire to patronise a nation, considering Sunak, not just as Prime Minister but as Chancellor, was asleep at the wheel on the cost of living crisis, way before what's going on now. And yet again, like they do with many things, they're coming up with inverted commas, solutions that are causing more problems. This inflation cycle is slightly different to a historical context of inflation. It's not about rampant consumer spending in a boom period. It's to do with essentials like energy and food. And there's reasons why that has happened. And some of it actually goes back to supply issues in the lockdown. It also is linked to quantitative easing. If you're going to pump in 400 billion into the economy over 2020 and 21, which was under the auspices of Sunak as Chancellor, then it's going to devalue and it's going to cause inflation. Combined with the fact the government weren't putting in measures to deal with the cost of living crisis until it was too late. Last summer, lest we forget, they were indulging, again, the same person in the arena, Rishi Sunak, indulging in leadership contests. The government seemed to be more concerned, and the Tories seem to be more concerned with that rather than getting on top of the cost of living crisis. And here we are. It's still not resolved. We've still got high inflation. We've also got interest rates that are spiralling, which again causes another set of problems because of mortgages, in terms of business loans and overdrafts as well. You know, there's people who are hanging on with their business and their ability to pay the basic essentials, either through inflation or now interest rates. And Sunak can say what he wants and patronise people, but fundamentally, he was the man in the arena as Chancellor and now Prime Minister, and the problems have mounted under his watch. He has to take responsibility with this, and he needs to level and actually potentially apologise to the British people and say, this is, you know, we're to blame. But they'll never do that. Instead, what they do is they put the onus back onto the individuals. I think it's absolutely outrageous.
And we're talking about a guy who's a virtual billionaire, add his fortune to his wife's, and he is a billionaire. I just don't think he understands. He doesn't understand that it's no point in saying to someone who cannot afford their mortgage repayments, hold your nerve, inflation is the enemy. Well, great, but they can't afford their repayment. What are you going to do about that? So he was accused today by the BBC, by Laura Kunsberg, of living in a parallel universe. And there is this fear that this incredibly wealthy guy lives in a world of financial theories and the practicality and the reality that we all face trying to get by. He simply does not understand. That is worrying.
It is. He doesn't relate to people. And comments like that make it worse. You know, we've been going through a cost of living crisis now for over a year. You know, Sunak Chancellor, Sunak Prime Minister, he's responsible for a lot of this because they haven't put the right measures in place, and they patronise us as well. The optics are not good. And meanwhile, businesses want solutions, households want solutions, and we're not getting things. Like a perfect example would be, what about slashing VAT, like properly slashing VAT? VAT is, I think, a terrible stealth tax that largely affects the poor. What about doing something about that? That would have a massive effect on businesses and also households if they did something on that. And what they're doing is they're tweaking with things, but they're not solving the problem. And here we are a year on with a mounting set of problems. And this is the legacy of this sort of Sunak administration, either as Prime Minister or Chancellor. Nothing gets solved. Problems get worse and patronise the public at the same time. We've got a general election coming up in a year. ultimately, he's going to pay a heavy price, because I suspect there'll be large components of the cost of living crisis still around next year. We'll come up to another winter of discontent, where no doubt there'll be spiralling energy prices again. And Sunak will, they'll blame it on the war, when actually the real cause of the problems of the cost of living crisis is the government. It is the government who's supposed to be serving us with solutions to get us through difficult times, rather than what Sunak's doing as a millionaire, brazenly patronising an entire nation and not coming up with solutions.
Absolutely, and perhaps he could do something, like something conservative, like cut some taxes so people have got a bit more money in their pockets, and perhaps not slyly and rather secretly reinstate £170 worth of green levies onto all of our energy bills, something that will cost us all about £2,500 a year. They put that back. Liz Truss slashed that, got rid of that because people couldn't afford it. Sunak and Jeremy Hunt have brought it back. This is not the time to be charging people £170 extra for a green levy on their energy bills. It's extraordinary, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's two aspects to the cost of living crisis. It's not just about inflation. It's also about taxation as well. I mean, and the taxation, the responsibility of that lies with the government. Stealth taxes, we talked about VAT, but also net zero taxation, for instance, or the amount of levy they're getting off, petrol prices. The net zero tax is something the public will not buy. I'm going to be quite upfront about this. I don't think the public buy net zero. I think, the large percentage of people want a healthy planet. They want free of pollution and so on, like old school environmentalism. But net zero, yet again with this government, is a solution that's creating loads of collateral damages. Now, this is what happened in the COVID era as well. They're not coming up with solutions that fix the problem. They just create other problems. And net zero, the public, there's all kind, 15-minute cities is a perfect example of that. It's creating other problems. It's creating issues in terms of businesses and turnover for businesses in the sort of test-run 15-minute cities. And we're getting taxation that's linked to net zero. And I'm getting a sense, and you're probably getting with callers on your show, Kevin, people are not buying this net zero claptrap. I'm going to say it's that, because I say this as an environmentalist. I care about the planet, most people do. But these net zero solutions are causing huge damage for businesses and also households. And fundamentally, it's not going to solve the problem. The main issue, if you want to talk about climate change, is what's going on in China and their emissions.
Yeah.
But what they're doing is they're coming up with solutions, the British government, that is, at the moment, in a cost of living crisis, there are other forms of taxation making a lot of problems even worse.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost as if Sunak, if you asked him to sort of sit down and come up with a master plan of how best to lose the next election, that he's putting it into practice. I mean, this is like, as I say, it's a textbook lesson in how to lose an election. And the first thing you have to worry about if you're a Prime Minister is the pound in people's pockets. Can they afford to get by? I always say the key to political success is if the people can afford a roof over their heads, can afford to feed their kids, run a car and go to Spain once a year on holiday, they'll vote you in. Sunak is a long way from delivering almost any of that. That's why he'll fail, because he doesn't understand personal finances.
Yeah, he's so far removed from it. It's a gilded lifestyle. You're right in your summary there, spot on. What the government has to focus on in serving the people is the bare essentials, the bare necessities. And that largely comes down to the economy. It comes down to, there's other aspects in terms of good public services that connect to that. But if you have a tanking economy, and this particular economic crisis is a bit different to the other ones, because it is connected to, as I said before, the bare essentials, to do with energy and to do with food. And when you level extra taxation in a difficult time, in particular nonsense stuff like net zero, which no one's really buying, then people are going to be rightly miffed about this. And I agree with you. It's like if you had a sort of summary about how do I chuck away the next election? Oh, I know. I'll come up with stupid net zero solutions and patronise the British public in difficult times.
Yeah, and make promises that I just don't keep. On that basis, on that tack, James, the last question, again about Rishi. He promised us, taking over from Boris, that he would be a Prime Minister who would be a beacon of honesty and integrity. So Laura Kunsberg this morning asked him and said, do you agree with the Privileges Committee verdict that Boris Johnson lied to Parliament? And why didn't you vote on it? Well, hi guys, I was very busy, you know, I just couldn't make it, you know, I was just too busy to make it to the vote. Yeah, right. She said, yes, OK, fine, you couldn't make it to the vote. Many people feel you could have easily made it if you wanted to, because that's true. But do you agree with the Privileges Committee? Did Boris Johnson lie to Parliament? He wouldn't answer. He wouldn't answer. Honesty and integrity.
Yeah, I know, the man of transparency. Remember that?
Yeah.
It's just, you know, empty rhetoric. You're getting worryingly good at your impression of...
Hi, guys.
I'm getting a bit worried. I'm seeing it every week now. It's too much. But no, he's just empty rhetoric, and he hasn't got any legacy. I mean, if he goes out loses the next election, which I think is likely, then people will look at his time as Prime Minister and think, well, what was that all about? Yeah. He didn't do anything.
It is strange.
I mean, there's nothing there at all. You know, I just want a Prime Minister that, you know, sometimes makes some hard decisions that in the long term are beneficial. And I actually give up the impression that they're trying to do the right thing for the population, but also they understand the mood of the nation. And we haven't got that. I've said this many, many times to you, Kevin, the only thing that's keeping this Tory government afloat with some skin in the game at the next election is what's happening with the opposition.
Yeah.
Because they're just as bad. I'm completely politically homeless. You know, I don't vote Tory, you know that. Yeah. But I'm looking at the opposition, I'm thinking, why would I bother with that as well? The only reason people would vote Labour is because they're just completely sick of this government. It's not like we had back in '97 when it looked like an opposition in waiting with that early part of Blair. Yeah. We haven't got that here. We've got, you know, two main parties who are offering nothing for the British people, and worryingly, they're not in tune with the mood of the nation. And at the moment, the mood of the nation is people are really miffed because there's an ongoing cost of living crisis, and we're not getting solutions from our politicians.